and he shaped up like, okay, let's go, we're going to do it. And I just went bang like that, did an elbow, didn't think about it, just came out, hit him right there, and he went land on the ground and lay there with his eyes open. Most of the fights started, like I said, it was a tough pub, and most of the fights there would start that we had 5 guys on the door and 2 guys inside surveying the crowd. It wasn't that big a pub, but we had like, on big nights, 7 bouncers. And the guys on the door would just watch people going in, and you had to enforce the dress code, and it didn't usually come to fights outside unless on some occasions guys had come back to get some bounce they had a grudge against, and they'd just jump them. But they had a bell that would go off when a fight started inside, so it was like being a fireman. It was really, the bell would go and then everyone would just jump into action, because it was quite tough, and people could get seriously hurt if you're a few seconds late. Someone might get their head caved in. So it was kind of exciting. You'd hear this buzzer go and everyone just bang, go flying in, and then you just grab whoever was pounding into someone else and try and throw them out, and that would usually just throw them out, or else they'd start fighting, or their mates would, and then it would turn into a brawl. We were bouncing at a pub, and by that time I had my own business hiring out bouncers, and all the bouncers in town, bar just half a dozen, worked for me. I had about 30 guys working for me at one stage, and we were all mic'd up with, so I could hear what was going on in the different pubs, and so I saw all the action. The pubs were all within the same block, and if there's something was going down, I'd go and help or call guys to go to a pub where there was trouble, because there's trouble with gangs and that. This little pub that I just started working for, there's only 2 of us on because it's a tiny little place, but this bike gang had decided to take it over, and what they did was the pub would only hold maybe 150 people, and they'd come in with like 20 or 30 guys and just bully people around, scare people and that, and sort of they took it over. So it was a very narrow, small little pub, and they basically made everyone shift over to the other side, so they'd taken over half the pub like that, and the thing was that they were going to make it their clubhouse, So that was a big problem. And then on top of that, they had a prospect, a guy who they were checking out to see if he was tough enough during the game. And what they'd said to him was that, okay, you go and take out that guy, and then that's a tick in your credit. And I could see this going on, and the guy had been antagonistic, and then he went out and tried to come in with a beer bottle, for about the 3rd time, and he was just keeping on going until I had to confront him. And by that time I was angry, and I'd said to the guy who was with me, okay, I'm going to belt him this time if he tries it on. And I stopped him, and he shaped up like, okay, let's go, we're going to do it. And I just went bang like that, did an elbow, didn't think about it, just came out, hit him right there, and he went land on the ground and lay there with his eyes open like he was dead, just like the movies, just dead like that. And I thought I'd killed him. He was only knocked out, and he came to in a few seconds, and went off on his way. And where he was at the door, and where I dropped him, the whole side of the pub who'd been moved over by the bikers saw it happen. So there was maybe 50 people who saw the whole thing, and all the bikers who were on the other side, out of the view of the door, had no idea what was going on. They'd taken over the part where the actual bar was, and everyone who was closer there saw it, and they obviously resented the bikers bullying them around. And so after I dropped this guy and sent him on his way, the one side of the pub all stood up and clapped as I came in. And I can remember really clearly, the bikers looked around and said, what the hell's going on there? What are they on about, And then later on, they found out, and I had a discussion with the head biker. I just said to him, well, what could I do? And they sort of understood that, One of the nastier things I saw was a guy get his throat cut. I mean, it wasn't slit ear to ear, but he got slashed with a broken schooner, and it was serious enough that he was bleeding a lot, and they took him to hospital. Everyone was really worried. And what happened was that guy got his throat cut open. The guy had done it, I saw it happen, and the guy had done it walked off. out of the pub, and as people ran to help the guy get his throat cut, one of his mates followed the guy who'd cut his throat, and me and Moitu followed them down the street. Moitu was another bouncer, and just as we got there, the guy who was friends of the guy with his throat cut had a beer bottle that he'd smashed, so it was broken on, he had hold it by the neck, and it was broken at the bottom there. And it was I think he was a white supremacist guy, who was a big white guy who was, he was fighting, he had a bald head. And as we got there, he was just went on top of the guy's head, and it just split like a watermelon. It was just horrible, and the blood streamed down. It was like, if you've seen that movie Carrie, where she gets covered in blood, it was like that. It was like he'd jumped into a swimming pool of blood, just because the head bleeds a lot. And they got about 50 metres away, 100 metres away when we got to them. We pulled them apart and just let the other guy go because this guy was seriously hurt. And in the time it took us to walk back to the pub, so maybe 50 metres, he was already starting to feel faint from, I think, loss of blood. There was enough blood to that. Maybe it was that he was just in shock, because it was a pretty shocking thing. But so we got them back. We had one guy sitting there waiting for the ambulance with his throat cut, another guy sitting there looking like he had jumped into a pool of blood. That was horrible. And then other things like, I saw people get, a couple of times people pulled knives. There's certain incidents that sort of stick in your mind because I guess you get a kind of post-traumatic stress from it. Things that didn't even really end up someone being hurt. There's one time when a guy got knocked out and he was out on his back, and the guy had knocked him out, came up and went to do a stamp down on the guy's throat, which would have killed him if it had worked. He miskicked or something, it didn't kill him, but I quite often get a flash of that thing, and there's another time when two guys smashed a bottle over another guy's head, and I sometimes see that flash up in my mind for some reason. I've come through unscathed. I've actually benefited from it because it's just made me totally disinterested in violence. I don't even like any violence in movies. I won't watch. Even stuff like I walked out of, my wife watches David Attenborough documentaries, and I always usually get up and walk out of it as the bear's got to kill something for food or something like that. So yeah, it's just made me very adverse to violence. I don't think it's made me scared of violence. I don't get intimidated easily, but I really don't like it, and that's the effect really.